right, guys, sit down, buckle up. Got an exciting episode here for you, getting you fully prepared for week 2. What I'm going to do is give you all the optimal plays at each position, the guys that have tougher matchups at each position, simply laid out with my input as well. So, for example, this week, Derek Carr, optimal matchup. If you're debating between Derek Carr and Justin Herbert, they both got good matchups, and you're going to be aware of that so you guys can make educated decisions. So I lay this episode out very easy. Optimal players and players that have tough matchups, and my input on that at each position so you guys could take that information with you and go crush this week. So starts and sits, fantasy football week 2 is here. I'm super excited about this. And again, guys, leave your questions below here on YouTube. I want to make this interactive. So if you're in the car, jump on over to YouTube as well. I'll try to get to as many questions as I possibly can because I'm trying to provide you guys with as much value as I possibly can as well. All right, guys? Now, this show is brought to you by Manscaped.com. If you have not treated yourself, if you've not gotten the Lawnmower 4.0 and you're not staying groomed and staying fresh, I don't know what else to tell you, man. You got to get on it. Like, I'm using the body wash. I'm using the deodorant, right? I'm using the shampoo. I'm using the trimmer. I'm using the nose hair weed whacker. I'm using the exfoliator on my balls with the razor. They've got amazing products, guys. Go try them. Go treat yourself. Manscaped.com. The code you want to use upon checkout is SHOWERLINE20. Okay, guys, go try it out. You'll be very happy with the products. It's stuff that I would actually use. I don't promote stuff I won't actually use. It's stuff that I actually use. In fact, I'm wearing the underwear right now. Super comfortable, super fit. Those are the Boxers 2.0. They got everything you guys need. You don't have to shop anywhere else. Manscaped.com, SHOWERLINE20. You've got that special code. You're going to save a lot of cash, and you're going to get a phenomenal product coming to your door. Okay, guys? Also, I'm going to help you guys make some dough this weekend. Easy dough here, actually, guys. Easy winnings. Easy pickings, I should say, right? Here we go. Check this out. I've teamed up with Prize Picks as well. I'm going to show you guys. Let's talk about this here. Saquon Barkley, guys, over or under rushing yards. Last week, Saquon Barkley had himself a good week. What do you have? Over 164 rushing yards, guys. And Prize Picks has got them listed, guys, at 70.5. I'm taking the over here on Saquon Barkley, all right? This is very simple. You just take 2 to 5 picks, you parlay them, and away you go. Easy dough, okay, guys? So I got Saquon Barkley, 70.5. I got the over there. Let's take a look at some other easy ones. Jonathan Taylor, 104.5. He had well over that last week. You could say over. That's a tricky one. It's up to you. You may go under this week. And by the way, when you go to prizepicks.com, use code DFSLINE. That's the code you want to use. Let's look at another one here that looks relatively easy. Zeke had a bad week last week. 41.5 for Zeke, okay? 41.5 over under rushing yards. I'm going to take the over on a bounce back week here for Zeke. But we're going to talk about that. Does he have an easy matchup or tough matchup? So you're going to use this show to help you guys, but you're going to go to prizepicks.com. It's available in most states, so go try it out. Type it in, create an account, prizepicks.com. DFS line is the code. Go have some fun, guys. Easy wins this week. All right, guys, go try it out. Prizepicks.com. DFS line. All right, let's start off with let's get into this. Let's start off with the quarterback position. Starts and sits. If you're new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe and hit the thumbs up if you're a regular. I appreciate the thumbs up. It really helps the channel. All right, let's start off with the quarterback position here, and let's talk about this. Derek Carr, right? Marcus Mariota, Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, who's coming off a big week last week. So now we've got a point of reference. This is the nice thing about starts and sits for week 2. We've got a point of reference. Carson Wentz did pretty good last week. So am I expecting that again this week? Possibly. Now, he did end up throwing a couple of interceptions, which is a big problem, especially if quarterbacks are penalized in many leagues. Now, for DFS and other things, it won't be as much of an issue here because I think he's going to do better this week. 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions last week, 313 yards for Carson Wentz, and he's got a relatively easy matchup this week against Detroit. Be aware of that, okay? Now, do you start Carson Wentz? If you got a more secure quarterback, probably not. And again, could it have been a one-week wonder with Carson, or is he the real deal this year for fantasy and reality? Something to be monitoring, something to be watching too. He's got some weapons with Dotson and McLaurin. He's got some weapons there, so something to watch, but he does have an easy matchup. Justin Herbert coming off a phenomenal week last week. Again, over 23 points last week, playing KC, relatively easy matchup this week. Stafford, coming off a terrible week last week, has got an easy matchup versus Atlanta. if you guys drafted Stafford, this is a week you may want to consider starting him. But again, I personally don't trust him. Brady coming off a mediocre week last week. What do you have? Like 11 points for Tom Brady. Really unacceptable for a guy that was drafted. And I'm rounding up on this, guys. He had 10.38 points. 11 points for Tom Brady last week. Does have an easier matchup versus Saints this week. A lot of people drafted him in the 7th, 8th round. I mean, he is your starter. He can only do better. He was neutralized last week, so be aware of that, okay? Now, when I talk about guys that have tough matches, you got to be aware that the quarterback somewhat did poorly. Now, for example, Jalen Hurts, he's got a tough matchup this week. So if you're thinking of starting him, he had what did he do last week, Jalen Hurts? He had himself, what? Let me pull this up here, 25 points. But he's playing Minnesota, who neutralized Aaron Rodgers last week. So this is something to think about. Now, again, a point of reference. But he does have it tough versus Minnesota. They played hard. They got to Aaron Rodgers. They sacked him. They played him hard. So if you guys are excited about Jalen Hurts this week, just understand that he has a tough matchup. So if they neutralize Jalen Hurts, you'll know that Minnesota defense is absolutely for real. But if Jalen Hurts comes in and tears it up, you might think that, oh, Hurts is the real deal. But on paper, he's got it in tough, okay? Jameis Winston, Ryan Tannehill, Lamar Jackson coming off a 21-point week. Got it in a little bit tougher this week versus Miami. Aaron Rodgers, 5th hardest matchup versus position here on paper, coming off a 6-point week last week. Absolutely ridiculous, terrible week. Joe Burrow coming off a pretty high point game, 26 points, but he threw a bunch of picks last week. Quite a bit, actually. I think, what did he throw, like five picks last week? Let me pull this up here. 4 interceptions, 2 touchdowns for Burrow last week. So he's got a tough matchup versus Dallas defense. And again, if you started Burrow, if you have him as your quarterback, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't start him, all right? Daniel Jones coming off an 18-point week, got it in tough. Jared Goff and Geno Smith, who had a safe week versus Seattle with 17 points, got it in a little bit tougher versus San Fran. And then you got your big names, your Pat Mahomes, Russell Wilson, Josh Allen, guys like that. All those guys have mid-range, mid-tier type matchups. So it's not favorable, but it's also not a bad matchup. Now, a lot of people asking here about Trey Lance. Trey Lance is a guy that people drafted, predicated that he is their starter. Now, he had himself a bad week last week. He had 11 points. This week he's got a mid-range matchup versus Seattle. I'm not a Trey Lance believer. I'm really not. Although, again, slightly favorable matchup this week. Had it in tough last week, 11 points. Do you start him? That's a big question. Do you have another backup quarterback? Who's your other quarterback? How does his matchup compare from what I've just told you, right? The guys that have it in tough. Is Lamar Jackson your other quarterback? Who is it, right? Is it Jalen Hurts? Is it Geno Smith as a backup, right? He had a pretty decent week last week. He's got a tough matchup. You got to take the information I'm taking and make the right decision. Now, starts and sits isn't like a clear-cut decision because everybody has different rosters, right? So it's up to you to take this information, cross-reference it with last week, and make educated decisions because starts and sits literally makes or breaks your season. And I'm not here to say, start this guy, start that guy, because we don't know. We really don't know. Again, Aaron Rodgers, 5th hardest matchup for his position, coming off a bad week. He can come in here, right? Actually, he's going to be, I think he's going to be at home, right? Is he going to be at Lambeau? Yeah, I think he's going to be at Lambeau Field. He can go out and tear it up this week, right? So take a look at that, guys. Take a look at everything, all the variables, and make educated decisions. So those are the tough guys that got it tough. A couple names: Jalen Hurts, Winston, Tannehill, Lamar, Aaron Rodgers, Joe Burrow, Daniel Jones, Jared Goff, Geno Smith. Tougher matchup: the Kylers, the Herberts, the Matt Ryan, the Mariota, Derek Carr, Carson Wentz. Jacoby's even got an easy matchup coming off an 11-point game. He's playing the Jets. Could have a decent game, right? Especially in DFS. And then Brady, Justin Fields actually got a good matchup as against Green Bay as well. So be aware of that. Baker as well, Robbie Anderson, guys like that, which we'll talk about, all right? So those are the guys that have it easier. Matt Ryan coming off a terrible week. Not terrible, but he had a slow start, ended up with about 20 points playing Jacksonville. Great matchup, second easiest versus position. So if Matt Ryan's your backup, you may want to consider him, all right? Let's move on here to the running back position. Again, remember, head on over to prizepicks.com. I'm going to put the screenshot here up again here. Take a look at this, guys. Select 2 to 5 picks here. I do like Zeke Elliott here over the 41.5. You just parlay 2 to 5 of these guys, and it's easy winnings for you guys here. I mean, some of these lines look really, really easy. Zeke Elliott over 41.5. Again, I see a bounce back there. Derrick Henry, 84.5. Maybe he bounces back this week. Had a bad week 1. So you got to kind of take a look at what they did last week, their matchup this week, which I'm going to give you if it's easy or not, and make an educated decision. But go to prizepicks.com. DFS Lion is the code you want to use. Create an account using DFS Line. I've linked it here below here on YouTube, okay? But you want to make the right draft decisions here on Prize Picks, all right? Let's keep going here. Now moving on to the running back. Who has got it in tough? Now, Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson. Ironically, they got it in tough versus Atlanta's rush defense. Now, big question. Do you start Cam Akers? Do you trust him? I don't trust him. I'm probably sitting him this week if I owned him. I wouldn't spend a third-round pick on him. I just thought he was too boomer busty, and I specified this in 16 rounds. You can draft him. He's got that upside, but I specified boomer bust on him, and in my mock drafts, I laid out saying I'm not drafting him. Like, I actually did not draft him because I do mock drafts on how I would draft a team in 16 rounds, and Cam Akers was not on none of those teams. So I don't believe in, like, maybe if Henderson gets hurt, but now Henderson had the 12 points last week. He's the one that kind of did better. So maybe they run with Henderson. Maybe Cam Akers gets a chance. Either way, they've got a tough matchup. Patterson had himself a good week last week. Cordarrelle Patterson playing the Rams this week. He's going to have it in tough this week, guys. Had himself 26 points last week. Be cautious with him. Dameon Pierce, the big question with him. Do you start him? Do you sit him? That's a great question. I'm going to probably consider starting him. Now, he had the key with him is he had 5 points last week. The volume is key. They were working Rex Burkhead because they were trying to win a game in overtime, and they wanted that reliability of a veteran, right? So maybe that was one of the reasons they really wanted to win the game down the stretch. They didn't want to put Dameon Pierce in and put the pressure on him. I'm hoping they start using him more because he's definitely better out of the two. Rex Burkhead has no business having more snaps than Dameon Pierce, but it's going to be something to watch here. But they do have the third toughest matchup versus position. This is something that you need to be aware of. Although Penny did okay with against Denver last week, so you got to take a look here and make an educated decision, see what other options you have. Aaron Jones, right? Fourth hardest matchup versus position, and I was going into the season telling you this, that Dillon is the RB1. When you look at it from a point standpoint, 20 points to 11 last week, Dillon versus Aaron Jones. And I'm telling you guys, Dillon is the RB1. That's why I told you to fade Aaron Jones. Everyone's telling you to draft him in the second round, but that's, not here nor there. We got to focus on what's happening now, and he does have a tough matchup. Now, I did see some reports stating that LaFleur is saying that Aaron Jones needs more than, 8 touches. He needs to get more into the game, so maybe they start utilizing him more. Maybe they need him more. That's why they lost catastrophically. But I know the problem with that game last week. It's like Aaron Rodgers was not throwing to his receivers. I chalk that up to ego. He just was not throwing to his receivers because of that drop with Watson. So he's like, screw these guys. I'm going to go to Dillon. I'm going to go to Jones. I'm going to go to my tight ends. I'm going to go to Romeo Doubs a little bit to my veteran receivers. But he really wasn't looking downfield to Watson after that drop. I think he targeted Christian Watson 2 times after that drop. And he just, again, it's going to be interesting to see if, he starts utilizing his receivers this week. If Lazard comes back, something to watch. But Aaron Jones does have it in tough if you decide to start him. If you draft him in the second round, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't start him. I personally don't trust him, okay? Now, keep going here. Alvin Kamara was banged up. We already have 8 points last week. I don't trust Kamara, but either way, Ingram, Saints running backs have a bad matchup this week. Derrick Henry, 6th hardest matchup versus position versus Buffalo. Now, here's the problem. Derrick Henry's coming off a bad week. What do you have? 8 points. Hilliard was the guy that got more points. Why? Because he had the 2 receiving touchdowns. Hilliard is not a guy I would start because he's not going to get the attempts. He had 2 rushing attempts. So all these people who got Hilliard off the waiver wire and got excited, he's not a running back. He's just a scat back that caught a couple passes last week and got lucky. Either way, they've got it in tough. So Derrick Henry's got to step it up against one of the best rush defenses on paper here. 6th hardest matchup versus position. So be cautious with Derrick Henry, but I'm not sitting him. I'm starting him. I don't care. He's got to bounce back. He's the king, and he's got to run wild. We got to pick it up, Derrick Henry, okay? Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt, again, outdoing Nick Chubb. Another guy, similar situation. I don't invest early in Nick Chubb. Not here nor there. Besides the fact, if you got Nick Chubb, 7th hardest matchup versus position. J.K. Dobbins, man, been banged up, right? So I don't know what's going to happen with him. But either way, whoever you're starting there, with Baltimore, I don't trust. I told you, stay away from Baltimore running backs. Last week was a perfect example of it. Zeke Elliott, 9th hardest matchup versus position. Najee Harris, all guys that are workhorses got it in tough. Now, going back to that Prize Picks decision, if you haven't got an account, prizepicks.com, DFS Lion, that's DFS Lion, create an account. I still like the over here, the 41.5 rushing yards for Zeke Elliott. In a bounce-back type week, they got to give him the volume if they want to win. They got to run the ball more. Dak Prescott's hurt. I still like Zeke Elliott here with, over that, the 41.5 or whatever I just stated here. Yeah, 41.5. So, yeah, PrizePicks.com, DFS Lion, great account, dive in, but I like the over. I could be wrong, okay? No guarantees there, right? But he's got the 9th hardest matchup for his position, does Zeke Elliott. Najee Harris, 10th hardest matchup. He should be good to go. There's some injuries there, but he should be good to go. I would start him. James Robinson, again, let's talk about this last week. Travis Etienne, James Robinson. Everyone drafted Travis Etienne, or the mainstream Consheeps told you to. I said draft James Robinson. James Robinson outdid him 20-9 in fantasy points and is the RB1. I was telling you guys going into the season, and he is definitely a start, but he's got a tough matchup. James Robinson, that is. Now, Breece Hall, Michael Carter. Who do you start here? Are you starting Breece Hall? I'm starting him if I don't have a better option. He was a 3rd round pick, 3rd to 4th round pick. He should get more volume, 11 points last week. I think they're working him in, and they're going to start weaning off Michael Carter. They're going to ride the hot hand here. So Breece Hall should eventually be the hot hand. Maybe he goes off this week. He's got a mid-range matchup, okay? Let's go with the guys that have optimal matchups, okay? Dalvin Cook, optimal matchup versus Philly. I mean, it's very simple here. 14 points last week. Has to step it up. This is a guy that people drafted as a top 6 pick. I'm not sold on him. Been playing like garbage, I would say. Not excited. Josh Jacobs, good matchup. Let's keep going here. And again, it's up to you guys to make a decision depending on who else is on your roster. Every roster is different, okay? James Cook, a lot of people asking if they should start him. -1 point last week. No, don't start James Cook. I told you it was a committee going into that. Volume would be an issue. And maybe a hot hand would prevail eventually, but James Cook has not been the hot hand, although a favorable matchup for Singletary and that committee, but I don't have any stock. Saquon Barkley coming off running wild last week, and the Consheeps are all over him now. They love Saquon Barkley all of a sudden. Easy matchup, 3rd easiest versus position here. Antonio Gibson coming off a decent 20-point game last week, 3rd or 4th easiest matchup versus position, 4th. Javonte Williams, 21-point game. Him and Melvin Gordon both fumbled. I don't know what to tell you. Javonte seemed to be the guy. They were bringing in Melvin Gordon in short yardage situations. I still think it's Javonte. Javonte looked better on the field overall. I still like Javonte. Great matchup this week. Start him. Christian McCaffrey, definitely start him. Obviously, volume guy, 16 points last week. Different type of offense, obviously, but definitely start worthy based on matchup versus the Giants. DeAndre Swift had himself a great week. And again, this is the guy I could be wrong about. Had a 30-pointer. Great matchup versus Washington this week. Obviously, start him. Miles Sanders, start him. He's got a good matchup, 19 points last week. I personally don't trust him, but it is what it is. James Conner versus Vegas, like it. Good matchup, 17 points last week. Start him. Jonathan Taylor, obviously start. Good matchup here versus Jacksonville. You're definitely going to want to start him as well. Eckler, coming off a mediocre week, has got a relatively mid-range, slightly favoring an easy matchup here. 11 points last week. Austin Eckler, you got to start him if you got him. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Isaiah Pacheco, Joe Mixon, all these guys, Rashad Penny, mid-range matchups going into this week. All right, guys? So those are your starts and sits at the running back position. Go back, listen again. I'm going over it. And again, it's up to you guys to make a decision on who you want to start and who you want to sit. All right, so who's the start at wide receiver? Now, Drake London, a guy I was high on, has actually got a really easy matchup versus Rams secondary. 12 points last week, not bad. Definitely worth a start. Start Michael Pittman. Start Alec Pierce. That's a good question. Do you start him? As of right now, he's not trustworthy. He's not. Matt Ryan has an easy matchup this week. Could actually start stepping up here and, getting it to Alec Pierce a little bit more. Something to watch here. Alec Pierce, as of right now, very hard to trust, but has a good matchup this week. Probably got the week 1 rookie jitters out, and maybe this is the week for Alec Pierce, but he does have a favorable matchup if you decide to start him. Cooper Kupp, great matchup, coming off a big week versus Atlanta this week. 35 points last week, walking right into a great matchup. Allen Robinson as well. Do you start Allen Robinson? I mean, you guys drafted him in the 6th round, 5th, 6th round. I told you to fade him. I don't believe in this offense. I really don't. I think the Super Bowl hangover is going to kick in. Matt Stafford with the elbow. I faded it. If you guys have Allen Robinson, I think he can only do better than last week in his 2 points. So, yeah, I mean, they got to start targeting Allen Robinson because the defenses are going to be keying in on Cooper Kupp. I don't see it continuing at that pace for Cooper Kupp. He's going to be solid, but it's just not maintainable and sustainable. He did pick up where he left off last year, but can he maintain it? I'm going to still say no. I'm riding this whole Cooper Kupp's going to get hurt or just decline train, all right? Other guys that have good matchups here, you may want to consider. New England Patriots, I mean, their wide receivers just didn't do well last week. I mean, Jacoby Myers, 10 points. Devontae Parker crapped the bed. Be careful, although they do have a good matchup versus position. I talked about Brissett having a good matchup versus the Jets. So does Amari Cooper, had himself a pooper of a game. Amari Cooper, better matchup this week, definitely considering worth a start. Jerry Jeudy, good matchup versus Houston, him and Cortland Sutton. And people ask who the wide receiver one is. 23 points for Jeudy last week, Sutton 11 points. Now, there were moments where obviously that big touchdown catch with Jerry Jeudy, clear-cut wide receiver one. Then mid-game to end, he was starting to go Sutton a little bit more. Then he went back to Jeudy. It's still tough to determine who the one is. I'm still leaning Jeudy, sticking with it after week one. I'm right, but Sutton was getting more involved as the game went on. So something to watch there. Both of these guys have a great start matchup. Deontay Johnson, start him. He's playing New England. Great matchup, had 13 points, had that one catch, which I think he went out of bounds for. Definitely start worthy. Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. Do you start Adam Thielen? Again, similar situation with Kupp and Robinson. I mean, they got to start utilizing the other wide receivers. 42 points for Jefferson. Is that going to continue once defenses kick in and key in? Probably some double coverage opening things up for Adam Thielen. It's going to be tougher for Jefferson and Cooper to maintain that pace. That's my opinion. Jamar Chase here, similar, great matchup. So all the top dogs, great matchups this week. Justin Jefferson, Cooper, Jamar Chase, all great matchups here. Okay, T. Higgins I think is still banged up. You may want to start Tyler Boyd if Higgins misses the game. Also, Stephon Diggs, another great matchup. So all the top dogs pretty much have great matchups. So continued success potentially for their amazing run. So going to be interesting to see. Treylon Burks, 9 points last week, mid-range matchup there versus Buffalo. And Kyle Phillips I picked up off waiver wire. Got a pretty good matchup as well here versus Buffalo. Not the easiest, but a decent matchup, okay? Allen Lazard, check his injury status. If he's back, he's got a mid-range matchup. Very interesting to see who starts there, who gets the volume. Christian Watson, is it going to be trusted more? Something to watch. Is it going to be Dobbs? Still a situation to monitor and watch. Deebo Samuel, mediocre, I would say crappy week. 14 points last week, mid-range matchup. Amon-Ra St. Brown, mid-range matchup. Tyler Lockett, mid-range matchup. Who's got it in tough? That's the big question. Oh, by the way, Adams as well. I talked about all the top dogs having good matchups. Adams has got a mid-range matchup. Brandon Cooks has got it in tough versus Denver secondary. Be aware of that. I'm still starting him. I like the connection there with him and Davis Mills. Jalen Tolbert, not worth starting right now. Still hasn't gotten going. CeeDee Lamb, all those guys. Tough matchup versus Cincinnati. Who else has got it in tough here? Michael Thomas coming off a big game last week. They do have it tough against Tampa Bay secondary. Be aware of that. A.J. Brown, we talked about this. Hurts has got it in tough versus Minnesota. So does A.J. Brown coming off a big week as well. Christian Kirk coming off a solid week. Got it in tough versus Indy secondary. Be aware of that. Mike Evans, Julio Jones, they've got it in tough here versus New Orleans. Be aware of that. And Robbie Anderson coming off a big week. Got it in tough versus the Giants. And finally, McLaurin Dotson coming off those big weeks. Got it tough on paper versus Detroit. So I'm just telling you guys that these guys have it in tough. I'm not saying don't start them. Again, every roster is different. It's up to you guys to make that decision. Now, if you guys want direct access to me, go to patreon.com/ffcounselor for direct access. All right, guys? And I do live Q&A starts and sits every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern. All right? Let's move on to the tight end. I'll give you some defenses to stream here for the week. Who's got it in easy? Who's got it in tough? Darren Waller coming off a 12-point game. That's to be expected with Adams being on the offense. Very high draft capital on Darren Waller for a guy that I was telling you, if Adams is going to be the one, why would you grab Waller? I stayed away from this entire situation. It looks like Adams is the guy, but again, are they going to be able to force feed Adams consistently? Maybe Waller takes a step up this week as defenses key in on Adams. So the first 3 weeks are really feeler out weeks. At the fourth week, you should have a full groove in regards to who's going to get the volume, what's going to happen, and the snap counts, okay? But Darren Waller does have a good matchup. O.J. Howard, good matchup. Denver plays tight ends a little softer here on paper. O.J. Howard coming off that 2-touchdown week. Good matchup, okay? Tyler Higbee, good matchup. Be aware of that. 9 points last week. Not over the top exciting. Dalton Schultz, a guy that people were really high on. 13 points last week. Relatively easy matchup this week versus Cincinnati. Gerald Everett, 14 points. Definitely worth a start here. Good, good matchup. Travis Kelce, obviously worth a start. Great matchup here versus the Chargers. Gesicki, coming off a crappy week last week, does have a better, more favorable matchup this week versus Baltimore. I would say start him if he's one of your tight ends. Mo Alley Cox, 5 points, and the tight ends from the Colts, easy matchup. Goddard, 9 points last week, easy matchup. So you got to look at kind of what they did last week, how they could potentially do this week. Now, Mark Andrews, very high draft capital. You got to start him in your season long, right? Mid-range matchup, had only 10 points last week. Very, has not returned his investment after 1 week, but it is very, very early. Again, when you are starting a tight end, my goal here is to get 10 points out of them, okay? So I don't put a lot of weight on my tight ends, but if I draft a guy like Kyle Pitts, and I did in one league, which tight ends are heavier weighted, they're 1.5, and he puts up 4 points like last week, I'm pissed off. And Kyle Pitts does have a tougher matchup this week on paper versus the Rams. So Kyle Pitts, still got to start him, but he's got it in tough. I have no choice. I got to take a look at who my backup is in that league, okay? Cole Kmet, terrible week 1. I mean, it was raining. What do? Do you start him? He's still got a tough matchup this week. So if you have a better option, I'd probably start a better tight end until Cole Kmet proves himself, okay? Hayden Hurst seems to be a primary target there for Cincinnati. 4th hardest matchup versus position. I would still consider starting Hayden Hurst. Again, highly targeted, not highly, but pretty solidly targeted week 1. Looks to be the tight end one in Cincinnati. Definitely worth a start there if you get the 10 points. Pat Freiermuth, 13 points last week. Tough matchup this week. Again, these are tougher matchups. So Hawkinson, Freiermuth, Hurst, Pitts, Dawson Knox even. Hardest matchup versus position versus Tennessee. Disley. These guys have tougher matchups. Be aware of that, okay? Let me see if there's anyone else. Hunter Henry, mid-range matchup there. Njoku had only 2 points last week. Very depressing for a guy they paid in the offseason. 2 points, very, very depressing there. Has a mid-range matchup, okay? So those are your tight ends. Go back, listen again. Make sure you guys start and sit the right person. Defense, who's got an easy matchup versus position? You could say on paper the Cowboys do, but, again, Burrow throwing those picks, that's going to give you guys some points. So be aware of that. Steelers versus New England. Mac Jones was banged up. Back spasms. We'll see what happens with his condition. Steelers do have a good matchup. And the Steelers looked good, man. Don't sleep on the Steelers. Let me pull up here. I think they had the most points last week at defense and special teams. Yeah, 24 points last week, followed by the Dolphins, Bills, Chargers, and Tampa Bay. So you got to take a look at them this week, man. Steelers against, New England, good match, especially in DFS. Falcons against the Rams, relatively good matchup, but be cautious there. Stafford could turn it up. Who knows? Bengals versus Dallas as well. Cardinals versus Vegas, and the Bears versus Green Bay. But again, it's going to be potentially, it's going to be something to watch. Maybe Aaron Rodgers, yes, he's got a tough matchup versus position, but he comes back and tears it up. So everything varies, and you just got to be a little cautious here. I actually don't mind Seattle versus San Fran as well here as a starting streaming defense this week, and also the Browns versus the Jets, because we're not sold on the Jets being a good team. Wacko Flacco out there throwing interceptions. All right, guys? So there you have it. Starts and sits for week 2. I can't believe we are rolling through here, guys. Go back, listen again, and, of course, join patreon.com/FFCounselor for direct access. And head on over to manscaped.com. Use code SHOWERLINE20. Go treat yourself right now, guys. Go try the trimmer. Try the body wash. You will like it, all right? Drop your questions below. I'll get to them. Thumbs up. I appreciate it. Week 2 is upon us. Hope you enjoyed the show. A lot of information here. Digest it, absorb it, and make the proper decision. Start and sits week 2 is concluded. I'm out.